From 1937 to 1945, 270,000 POWs are stuck working on a railway, being cruelly worked to death. They had to keep up their hopes in the treacherous camps, where every day someone died of sickness or exhaustion. To keep their hopes up, they made their own makeshift theaters and put on small skits while the Japanese guards sometimes attended. The prisons were in the middle of the jungle, and this was enough to make the prisoners not be able to escape. The guards did not even expect the prisoners to escape. So, what was the Burmese Death Railroad anyway? It was part of the Japanese Empire's expansion. The Japanese had troops in Rangoon, and so far, they had only gotten the railroad as far as Bangkok. In order to supply their troops in Rangoon, they had to use a railway. The British Empire had already thought of this, but abandoned the idea because it was too hard. Who built this railroad? The POWs that the Japanese had captured from other countries that Japan had fought. These POWs included 200,000 Asian laborers, 30,000 British POWs, 18,000 Dutch POWs, 13,000 Australian POWs, 700 American POWs, and 15,000 Korean or Japanese soldiers forced to work on the railway. Think about that. That is 275,700 POWs or prisoners forced to work on this 400-kilometer railway. These people are working for 10 hours a day, non-stop. If they took a break or slowed down or stopped, they would be beaten harshly and often by Japanese soldiers. The far more devastating numbers are the number of deaths in camps and on the railway. Here are the terrible numbers. 80,000 deaths among Asian laborers, 6,540 deaths among British POWs, 2,830 deaths among Dutch POWs, 2,710 deaths among Australian POWs, 356 deaths among American POWs, and 1,000 deaths among Korean or Japanese soldiers forced to work on the railway. Imagine that. That is more than 92,000 deaths. That is about 128 people dying in different camps every day. That makes about 2 deaths a day at each camp. One could wake up to see the person next to them dead or near to it. The POWs were extremely desperate to get out of these camps, but they could not escape, only be released, which was impossible, to be rescued, which was near impossible. In order to keep their hopes up that they would someday be free, they needed a way to relieve their stress. To do this, they made small, makeshift theaters in which they performed skits or shows, normally against the will of the Japanese. These theaters were hastily constructed of bamboo and large leaves from rainforest leaves, and they were put in the normally dismal canopies that the POWs lived under. Many POWs found this relief as important as eating food, which was scarce. The POW workers did not often get to work on these skits and theaters because they had to work a long time on the railway, and when they got back, they would be very tired. Even if they could work on building something, it would be the officers' quarters, and then the hospitals, and afterwards the canopies under which they would be living. Even if they could finish this, they would then be able to start working on the building of a small theater and planning a skit. Since the POWs only had a couple hours to build and eat and do anything that was also crucial, the time left for the theater may not even be used to build or plan. The POWs may have wanted extra time to sleep, so that in the morning they could be more rested and work without getting too tired. This would have been advantageous, since the POWs were working for such a long time. Think about this for a minute. If the POWs had to work all the time, and they did not have time to build or plan a skit, then their hope could wane very quickly. This may mean death for prisoners. Prisoners did often not think about suicide because their work and sickness preoccupied them. The officer would have to kill them, though, if they did not get a task done on time or within a deadline. These deadlines were often very strict. This was because the way the Japanese thought about war, their philosophy, country before self. The whole reason that the Japanese needed this railroad anyway was because of their war campaign. The economy in Japan was failing, and it needed stimulation, so the rising militarists wanted to expand. This became the invasion of Thailand, Burma, Manchuria, China, and many other Asian countries. Of course, the Japanese needed to place troops in the countries that they had captured, and these troops needed supplies, such as ammunition, food, tents, and blankets. Unfortunately, these railroads were also used to transport the injured or dead prisoners, normally in the same carriage. The POWs were very malnourished and very ill, but still forced to work. This meant that infections were normally not treated and would grow worse while the prisoners were forced to work. The prisoners tried very hard to pace their work and not to overwork themselves, for overworking meant eventual death through exhaustion. The POWs were very, very overworked, and this led to beriberi, an infection that bloated the stomach. Almost every POW had malaria because of the mosquitoes that hovered constantly near beds. Another common disease was dysentery. There were two kinds of dysentery, amoebic and bacterial. The most common type of dysentery was bacterial. Dysentery caused frequent diarrhea, dehydrating POWs quickly. The amoebic dysentery was the most likely to kill quickly. There were many other infections that the workers could get, but the worst infection of all was the eventual loss of hope. In the end, there was an overall 20% death rate among the POWs, and in some camps, the death rate was as high as 40%. Thousands of POWs did go home, the ultimate reward for, at most, 3 years in hell. Many POWs, though free, were constantly plagued by malaria that they had contracted in the camps. The saga never did end for the POWs because their memories stayed stronger than anything else.